waiting for a phone call from someone special. It's been too long since you last spoke. The phone rings. Metal Gear Solid 3 is a journey through the process of grief, of dealing with the loss of someone you love and about how isolating that experience can be. While there is quite a large exposition dump right at the outset of the game, I'd like to start by focusing on the gameplay mechanics before diving into the characters, themes, and story in later sections of the video. The gameplay of Metal Gear Solid 3 does a lot of heavy lifting in terms of making the player feel lonely. Codec calls are the first gameplay mechanic that players are introduced to. As soon as Snake touches down from his Halo jump into Russia, he's receiving calls from his support team. Within those first few conversations with the cast of characters, they all set the precedent that you can always rely on your team and call them whenever you need, but that's not necessarily the case. There are many times throughout the game in which you call them only to be met with no answer. One of the earlier examples of this can be found during the Virtuous mission, the first section of the game. In the opening conversations, the boss, Snake's mentor, says that she's available for him to contact for support during this mission. However, at a certain point, if the player tries to contact her, she is completely unreachable, for reasons we'll see soon. This happens at several other points in the game as well, especially with the character Eva, who is another spy on the ground in Russia, occasionally aiding Snake in his mission. Since she's a spy, it makes sense that she wouldn't always be readily available to take a radio call. In fact, there's always a solid story-backed reason that many of these calls can't take place when Snake radios out. Whether for reasons affecting him directly or something happening to the characters on the other end of the line, there is a large emphasis placed on restricted communication in Metal Gear Solid 3, in stark contrast to the rest of the franchise wherein characters are generally available to speak with. This feeling of being cut off heightens the player's sense of isolation when navigating the Russian wilderness. Exploring that wilderness is a key part of the gameplay in Metal Gear Solid 3. While you do spend some time sneaking around military installations, the bulk of the game is spent deep in the jungle, on high-up mountain ridges, and across miles of thickly forested land. This is a shift in the gameplay as much as it is one in tone for the player. There are direct gameplay implications of moving through a more natural environment, which begs the question, what does the lack of man-made structures mean for us as players? There are far fewer pieces of cover for Snake to hide behind, and if you thought a walking cardboard box looked suspicious before, it would be tenfold out in the middle of the jungle. This paves the way for the camouflage system, giving players a way to hide in plain sight. To give a brief overview, every piece of terrain in the game has a camouflage index value, and a meter in the corner of the screen will tell you how well Snake is blending in against whatever terrain he's on. This meter also factors in weather conditions, such as rain, or the time of day wherein darker camos will blend better at nighttime, but for the most part you'll only have to worry about the actual patterns themselves against the terrain. You can swap your camouflage to blend in better at any point, and you'll want to, because you never know what is lurking around the next corner. With the deliberately unstructured design of the natural landscapes in the game, players are never given clear sightlines too far ahead. Whether it be enemies or one of the many animals or traps set throughout the levels, you're always at risk of missing something and getting spotted or attacked. You'll need to rely on your sense of sound now more than ever, listening to your surroundings and trying to find the distinction between the harmless sounds of nature or those of enemy footsteps encroaching on your hiding spot. Not only that, but certain areas of the game, such as the fight with the End, are so large and yet densely packed with foliage, animals, and noises that navigating it can feel as if you're truly getting lost in the jungle. These conditions put Snake and the player in situations where they are always on high alert. You need to move slowly, you need to remain quiet, you have to assume there is always someone or something that could spot you or hurt you around every corner. Couple this with the fact that there are no friendlies in the minute-to-minute gameplay. Everything you interact with has the capacity to hurt you. Putting the player under this constant threat, where their situational awareness is being tested whenever they're in control of the game, works to simultaneously exhaust your senses and further isolate you. But what happens when you're spotted? When you take damage? How does Snake Eater manage to make the healing system, which is ostensibly a menu screen, feed into that sense of loneliness and survival even more? Whenever Snake suffers an injury in the game, whether in actual gameplay or from a cutscene, the player will need to heal up. This is done in the Survival Viewer, a menu showing Snake in his current outfit alongside any injuries or statuses he's suffering from. First and foremost, players will want to take care of any immediate physical ailments. Anytime you take damage, be that from getting shot, stabbed, punched, etc., that harm will appear on Snake in the survival viewer. Every condition Snake has requires a specific type of treatment, and that treatment requires supplies. For example, if you have a bullet wound, you'll need to dig the bullet out using a knife, disinfect yourself, sew yourself back up, and put a bandage on. All for one wound. If you have a broken arm, you'll need to get yourself set up with a splint. If you're swimming and crawling through a cave and a leech attaches itself to you, you'll need to burn it off with your cigar. However, even when in good health, Snake can still be afflicted with hunger, another condition visible in the survival viewer. If untreated, this directly impacts the gameplay by causing Snake to sway his weapon more when aiming down sights, and even making his stomach rumble so loud that it can alert nearby enemies. This forces players to engage with yet another mechanic, that being hunting. As you move through the world, you'll encounter many different kinds of animals. Some hostile, others less so, but they're all fair game. Using your tranquilizer pistol or any of the lethal weapons you have, you can hunt the animals found in the jungle and eat them to cure your hunger. Depending on the type of animal or how long ago you caught them, eating them can even lead to additional health problems, such as food poisoning. Snake can get a tummy ache and be so brave about it, but it's better to just cure him in the survival viewer. No matter what the reason you need to use the survival viewer is, the fact of the matter is that no one is coming to save you. You'll need to use all of these systems and your knowledge to save yourself. One of the members of your support team, Paramedic, is available via codec calls, sure, but in the heat of the moment, you're the only one down there on the ground. There is no medivac, there is no backup, the only one who can keep you alive is you. You're alone. And it's that loneliness, that feeling that you're the only one you can truly rely on, that makes the themes of grief that much more potent. You hurriedly pick up the receiver, excited to hear from them for the first time in what feels like ages. An operator speaks briefly, confirming who you are before connecting the call. Snake needs to be a believable, well-written character in order for us to care about him and the grief he experiences. Something Metal Gear Solid 3 has absolutely no trouble achieving. From the very first moments of the game, we get these snippets of personality from Snake, quipping back and forth with the members of his team over the radio. Snake will talk to Paramedic about movies whenever you save the game. While Snake is not much of a moviegoer himself, these scenes were clearly a source of catharsis for Kojima, allowing him to give players a realistic simulation of what it's like to have a friend with a Letterboxd account. On top of that, you can call Sigint, the weapons expert, to chat about any equipment you find across Russia. The ensuing conversations do a stellar job at showing both Snake's sense of humor and how much of a firearms nerd he can be. But no scene in the game does a better job at that than the one on screen now, where Eva provides Snake with a custom-made pistol to make his job in the field ever so slightly easier. For the player, it's beyond clear that Eva is attempting to seduce him, but Snake is laser-focused on his new toy, calling out all of the special features of it, info-dumping in such an endearing way that it's impossible not to love him. This character building extends directly into some of the gameplay systems as well. The aforementioned hunting system provides Snake with tons of food, the bulk of which he's never tried before. When consuming this food in the survival viewer, clips of Snake chowing down will play, alongside him being quite vocal about how it tasted, whether he liked it a lot, not at all, and everything in between. Big Boss, the legendary soldier considered by many to be a demon on the battlefield, is also Naked Snake, the picky eater. It's this granular approach to character writing, providing so many little details that make Snake feel like an actual person, someone that not only exists, but one that is likable, relatable, and is experiencing the grieving process before our very eyes. This grief is delivered expertly in the form of the Cobra unit, with each member representing a new part of the grieving process. Not only that, but the pacing at which each member is introduced and how they align with Snake's mental state at each point of the game is borderline perfect. The Pain is the first member of the Cobras we face, an acrobatic, brutally violent, and utterly overwhelming enemy. It's fitting then that at this point in the story, Snake is still reeling from the revelation that the boss is defecting to the Soviet Union. Much like the Hornets used by the Pain, this betrayal of his trust stings. You'll have to pardon the pun, but I believe that was exactly the point. That was why the Pain was designed the way he was. Even down to the design of the boss arena itself, the game drives home this theme, this pain associated with grief. You encounter the pain in a cave system, and after a brief introductory cutscene, you find yourself standing opposite him, each of you on your own footing, separated by the water around you. The rock that the pain is on is far larger than yours, and he has the high ground. You can't easily jump across to reach him. As he sends his hornets after you, you can dive into the water below and emerge to climb back on several other surfaces in the arena, but the pain can only be avoided for so long. You'll soon come to realize that the only way out is through. You need to stand there and take it, to deal with the pain before you can move forward. Thematically, I love this fight, and I think the choice to put the pain as the first of the Cobra unit boss fights was fantastic. The next member of the Cobra unit we face is the Fear. His design, both in terms of visuals and gameplay, taps into, as you might have guessed, both Snake and the player's fears. His movement across the screen in cutscenes and during the boss fight itself is reminiscent of a spider crawling in an erratic, unnatural way, drawing out themes of arachnophobia. He twists and contorts his body far beyond what any human can do, evoking this visceral body horror. He leers at the player, hissing and revealing his serpent-like tongue, something I believe is key in his design, representing the parts of Snake that he sees in his enemies, the parts of himself that he fears the most. He's afraid of what's going to happen next, of what he may have to do as part of his mission. He's afraid of not just fighting, but of having to kill the boss. This fear within Snake manifests in the core mechanics of the fight. Traps litter the area, being triggered with next to no notice, coming out of nowhere and both scaring the player behind the screen and damaging Snake in the process. On top of that, the Fear uses poison darts when attacking Snake outright, which could not be a more fitting weapon for him to use. In relation to the stages of grief, Fear acts almost as a poison, dragging the person down slowly. If you let it, it can paralyze you, and furthermore consume you. Fear is an inevitable part of this process. You can't outrun it, and Metal Gear Solid 3 shows that overcoming it requires you to do some things afraid. Following this section of the game comes the fight with the End. With a name like that, you may have expected him to be placed at the tail end of the game, but I don't think his name alone gives us the full picture. The End is a sniper, clad in a ghillie suit, armed only with his rifle and the assistance of his parrot. You need to make your way across several massive areas of the game, making sure to stay low and behind cover, avoiding the ever-watchful eye of the End. Using all of your wits and equipment, such as the directional microphone, you need to slowly move across the map and get behind the End without being spotted in order to take him down. And when I say slowly, I mean really slowly, especially on higher difficulties. There is so much audiovisual information to take in during this fight that it could appear impossible upon first glance. Are you truly capable of making your way across this battlefield completely unseen? Will you be able to differentiate between the sounds of the End breathing and that of the numerous animals found wandering the forest? Can you pick his ghillie suit out from the overwhelming shades of green that fill your binoculars? All of this while moving slowly, waiting for something to happen, waiting for the End to finally strike. Yes, there are of course other ways to beat him and skip the fight entirely, either by killing him at the dock earlier in the game or by reaching his hunting grounds and setting your console calendar ahead by a few weeks. However, doing so arguably robs the player of not only a fantastic boss battle, but also of this integral part of Snake's journey through his grief. The fight with the End is placed exactly where it needs to be. Snake has overcome the pain and the fear of his situation and is now anxiously waiting for the end of it all, for his showdown with the boss. This character masterfully captures the feelings of grieving someone before they're even gone, of not knowing when the end will come, but sensing it could happen at any moment. Yet this, at times, agonizing wait for the end is still only part of the larger mental battle that is grief. In waiting for the end, Snake grows impatient, and that impatience grows into anger. Yet another stage of grief. This is where we're introduced to the Fury, a cosmonaut once left to burn up in the atmosphere, now standing face to face with Snake on a planet that would reject the both of them, one sooner than the other. This fight takes place in an underground tunnel system leading to Krasnogorje, a military base you'll need to infiltrate shortly. The concrete pillars and pathways that line the route to the exit, once clear in your vision, now obscured by a lone enemy. The Fury is equipped with a jetpack to aid in his mobility across this brutalist battlefield, leaving fire in his path, the heat of which can only be rivaled by the flames emitting from his weapon of choice. Protected well by his spacesuit, Snake can't just outright shoot the Fury and expect to do much damage, nor can he avoid the kiss of the flames growing ever closer with each ferocious attack. Through a combination of your knife slashing through his suit and clever use of the water pipes in the environment to douse him, you're able to overcome the Fury. A character and battle that shows how loss spreads, much like a flame. At a certain point in the grieving process, whether dealing with your own anger, your own fury, or someone else's, it starts to feel like all you're doing is putting out fires. The final member of the Cobra unit we face is the Sorrow. Unique from the rest of the boss fights, the Sorrow's battle most plainly wears its heart on its sleeve, in the sense that it is literally a step-by-step walk through the past, through all of the choices that Snake and the player have made throughout the game thus far. The player is led downriver by the Sorrow, and as you trudge towards him, the ghosts of every enemy you've killed start to appear, shambling after you, attempting to drag you back down under the water. Forcing Snake to look back and ask himself if he could have done things differently, hurt fewer people, could things be different now? It mirrors many of the same thoughts brought on by losing someone. If a change in your actions could have altered the outcome, if you had acted differently, would the person you lost still be here? Do you still have a chance to save the boss, or is her death an inevitability? All questions that have plagued his mind throughout this journey. The Sorrow, both the character and the emotion, was there from the start, hovering just out of the way, only being visible in flashes until this point. Before the fear settled in, before the pain of grief stung and then dulled, it was always there. But when there's nothing more to process, to work through, all that's left is the Sorrow. But what do you do when you've conquered even that? While there are many other story beats present in Snake Eater, the Cobra unit is an exemplary showing of writing on grief. Their designs, names, order of appearance, and overall implementation effectively delivers the stages of grief that Snake is experiencing throughout the narrative. But this grief wouldn't be nearly as impactful for the player if we hadn't seen who Snake is as a person, and more so, why he and the boss mean so much to each other. The call connects. You know you don't have a long time to speak to each other, so you make the most of it, catching one another up as best you can. Time is almost up, you've got to say goodbye, and on the other end of the line you hear something muffled, too difficult to make out. Over the course of Metal Gear Solid 3, we see several conversations between Snake and Eva, wherein she questions him about his relationship with the boss. And every time he responds, without fail, Snake repeats the same thing, that his bond with the boss is special. It's in evaluating the relationship between Snake and the boss that the players are put into Eva's shoes, acting as a third party to this dynamic, an outsider looking in. At the start of the game, one could make the same mistake as Eva, thinking that what they have is solely romantic. However, as the story progresses, as Eva and the player sees the two of them interact, we get the feeling that things aren't as simple as that. The relationship between Snake and the boss is the driving force behind the entire plot, and really the series as a whole. So it's paramount that players reach the same conclusion that Eva does by the end of the game. As players, our first interaction with the boss is the codec call as Snake lands in Russia. In this call, Snake recounts exactly how long it's been since they last spoke to each other, right down to the hour. And in response, the boss is able to tell that Snake has lost weight from the sound of his voice alone. It's been half a decade, and these two are able to pick things right back up and be in tune with each other instantly. This isn't the only time you're able to speak with the boss over the codec either. And rather than repeat some of these calls word for word, I'd like to let a few of them play out for you here now.
Are you smoking a cigar?
Uh-huh.
I don't approve of you smoking during a mission.
Hey, you used to smoke them.
Never mind what I did.
Ugh.
This is a solo sneaking mission. There's no one out there to support you. You'll need to be more than just a soldier. You'll have to be a medic, a pilot, and even a cook.
You don't need to remind me.
I'm glad to hear that.
Glad to hear what?
That you haven't changed a bit.
Hmm?
The truth is, You're nervous, aren't you?
I'm not nervous.
There is one weapon greater than any other in battle. Do you know what that is?
Yeah.
What?
Do we have to go through this again?
Yes,
Will. An unflinching will to survive no matter what.
exactly. The will to carry out your mission and return home alive will see you through even the most desperate of situations. It's the most potent weapon in your arsenal. Don't forget that, no matter what.
These calls do a fantastic job at fleshing out their dynamic and act as a perfect foundation to build on throughout the game. From the very moment that the boss defects to Russia, she is secretly helping Snake every single chance she gets. During our introduction to Colonel Volgin, the boss, along with the Cobra unit, presents him with American nuclear warheads as a gift for welcoming her. Volgin wants to kill Snake on the spot, but the boss steps in, stating that since Snake is her disciple, she should be the one to kill him. Using CQC, a fighting style that the two of them developed together, she quickly overpowers Snake. After breaking several of his bones, an unfortunate requirement to put on a good show for Volgin, the boss tosses Snake from the bridge they stood upon into the river below. They all bought it. Snake was as good as dead, but the boss knew just where to strike him, just where to throw him, so that he had the best chances of survival. Not only that, but later in the game, during the torture scene, she steps in to save Snake again, and even provides him with some equipment in the process. In a chamber deep beneath Krasnogorje, Snake is subjected to torture by the hands of Volgin and Revolver Ocelot. Both the boss and Eva are present as well, and Volgin tells the boss to cut out Snake's eyes so that he can no longer pose a threat. What follows isn't something you'll know is happening on your first playthrough, but everyone in this room, barring Volgin, has Snake's best interests at heart. Through the support of both Eva and Ocelot, the group manufactures a situation that would once again satisfy Volgin's bloodlust while keeping Snake alive. Everyone does their part to construct a convincing distraction. Eva steps in to stop the boss from cutting out Snake's eyes, and Ocelot then begins to threaten Eva with his version of Russian roulette, directing Volgin's attention away from Snake. In the commotion, Snake swings himself into Ocelot in an attempt to save Eva, losing one of his eyes in the process. This is where the boss intervenes once more, taking Ocelot's gun from him. Volgin seems pleased with the outcome of the situation, but to make sure the boss is upholding her role, she shoots Snake once in the leg. Before the scene closes out, we see the boss slip the now empty revolver to Snake, giving him at least somewhat of a fighting chance once he's moved to his prison cell. Once we wake up in that cell, if you go into the survival viewer, you'll see that the boss shot Snake with a bullet that held the fake death pill, yet another tool she was able to covertly provide us, continuing to support and save Snake even in the most dire circumstances. On top of all of that, in the final fight, there's one line in particular that sticks out to me. In the middle of her speech to Snake, the boss turns around and radios out saying, "Commence the operation." She goes on to explain that you have exactly 10 minutes to defeat her, as fighter jets will converge on this location at that time and level the area with bombs. But this wasn't some panicked, impromptu decision. She isn't scrambling these jets at the last minute. This is an operation. She said it herself. This was planned down to the last detail. This is where she would face Snake, and she specifically organized jets to be on standby for this very moment. She knew the bombs would kill her. She knew she still had to die for the mission. But down to the very last moment, she was prepared to protect Snake from himself, to protect him from having to be the one to pull the trigger. That is why she doesn't simply stand there and let you kill her. She's running out the clock, putting up enough of a fight to last until the bombs drop. This time, however, she can't save him. Snake finally beats the boss, and in one of the most poignant moments in the entire franchise, he takes her life. Yet, even though she's gone, we'll still hear from her just one more time. Prior to the chase scene with the Metal Gear near the end of the game, Eva admits she can see that Snake's relationship with the boss is something wholly unique to the two of them. At the same time, she still doesn't necessarily understand it, but recognizes it nonetheless. Once Snake and Eva have completed their mission and escaped Russia, Eva leaves him with a recorded tape. She delivers one final message from the boss to him, and now it clicks. In this tape, the true purpose of Operation Snake Eater is detailed. Why the boss had to defect to the Soviet Union, what her real objective was before one of the nukes was detonated, why Snake had to be the one to kill her, and how much she loved him. It's only in relaying this message for the boss, knowing what it means to hear that you are loved, even if it's not coming directly from the person themselves, that Eva, and thereby the player, finally reach an understanding of how much these two meant to each other. As we see throughout the rest of the series, Snake will forever carry the boss with him. Her teachings, her memory, her will, this interminable love for her. There is one quote from poet Ocean Vuong that I believe sums this up perfectly. Grief is perhaps the last and final translation of love. This is the last act of loving someone, and you realize it will never end. You get to do this, to translate this last act of love for the rest of your life. And I believe Snake does just that. You ask what was just said, but it's too late. The call had dropped. The operator tone breaks through, sending a crackle out of the handset speaker. He says he loves you. At the start of this video, I stated that Metal Gear Solid 3 is a game about grief and loneliness. But it's not just that. Metal Gear Solid as a series, at its heart, has always been about love. If Metal Gear Solid 1 asks the question, do you think love can bloom on the battlefield, then Metal Gear Solid 3 answers emphatically by saying it would be impossible for it not to. Because where there exists grief and loneliness, there was once love. Love much like that in the story I've been sharing with you throughout the video. Late last year, I lost my grandfather. This story is one of him and my grandmother, of a phone call that took place many years ago when he was stationed overseas. While I have countless wonderful memories of him, this story will always stick with me, standing as testament to the fact that even with all of the grief that accompanied his passing, the love was there. In the mourning period, I returned to Metal Gear Solid 3, a comfort game, something I could seek solace in. I've played it dozens of times before, but what I found this time was much more. I found a game that helped me process the loneliness, a story that walked side by side with me through my grief in a way to honor the legacy of someone I love. If nothing else, Metal Gear Solid 3 shows that the hardest part of losing someone isn't the pain, the fear, the end, the fury, or the sorrow of it all. It's not the grief and loneliness. It's the simple act of saying goodbye.